I'm here with Mark Hutchinson, the new Labour Party candidate in the Napier electorate. Kia ora, Mark, and thank you for talking with us.
Kia ora, Andrew. Thanks for coming today.
Yeah, no, thank you. Mark, you've just been elected to replace Stuart Nash as Labour's candidate in the Napier seat. To ask a question that will be on everyone's lips, who are you?
Well, okay, I'm Mark Hutchinson. I was born and raised in Napier, grew up in Taradale, lived in a little street called Gibby Road. Mum was a teacher and dad a salesman in Hawke's Bay, so we had a fairly ordinary sort of lifestyle. I spent all of my time at the local schools in Taradale, so Bledisloe, Taradale Intermediate and Taradale High School, so I never had to walk more than about 5 minutes to school. It's kind of the sort of idyllic upbringing that you'd kind of want any primary school teacher's kids to be able to have, actually. And then I went off to Otago University and became a clinical psychologist. Worked in the health sector, both in Wellington and in London. And then moved into business psychology for a big global blue chip consulting firm and worked with some incredibly interesting companies in London and the UK, before deciding, as our kids reached school age, that we'd really rather raise them in Napier. So we moved back to New Zealand to raise our kids in Napier at the beginning of 2010.
So you've been here for a good decade or so, and
yes.
So what have you been doing since then?
So I initially worked for the same global leadership company, working on their clients in New Zealand like Fonterra and Fletcher and Trustpower, and also flying over to Australia quite a bit to work with some big clients over there, and like BP and Jetstar. And in the last 7 years, I've successfully built my own business from scratch. So I have my own leadership consulting firm, which is based here in Hawke's Bay, but services big clients in the big cities. So I know what it's like to grow a business from scratch in the regions, because it's slightly different from being right on the back door of Auckland or Wellington.
Yeah. So successful business, clinical psychologist. Why would you want to get into politics?
That's a really good question, isn't it? I think obviously I wasn't planning to. I was quite happily ready to be. I've been involved in all of Stuart's 4 campaigns in Napier. I've had various roles, and last time I was his campaign manager. I was his get out the vote guy when he first won the seat, when Chris Tremaine retired, and I was quite happy to be his campaign manager. But I think that I was asked by people in the Labour Party and people in the local Labour Party that know me, and I had a serious think about it, and I thought, on your deathbed, it's going to be the things that you don't do that you say, oh, maybe I should have.
Yeah.
And, the world has got a lot of big challenges. I think the dual ones are inequality and climate change. And what am I going to tell my grandkids? Yeah. That I didn't step up and give it a go. So, and I suppose there's a longer history, which is kind of, I come from a family that my grandparents were very badly hit by the Depression, and there had been no GLAB government, right? Yeah. So there was no social welfare, there was no chance of them going to secondary schooling, and it took, the third generation to get someone like me to have the privilege to go to university, and have the life that I have. And I have a very strong belief that if you are able to utilise the wonderful privileges that you have living in this society, that you should give something back if you do well. Yeah. And so I'm leaning into it.
Yeah. So through no fault of your own, you don't have much time. It's 5 months or so to go. When Stuart Nash first ran for Napier, he had a long lead-in. I think it was about a year or even more. So does that bother you that you don't have much time?
No, it doesn't, because I think we've got a really good team here. So I've been involved in building up the team over the last 13 years that I've been home, and we've got some really strong people in the local team. The difference between us possibly and National is we're a grassroots organisation, so we don't just do politics in an election year. When the community was struggling during COVID, we had people out delivering care packages to people that were struggling, and I was out, door knocking in the streets of Maraenui and Marie. We're trying to get the vaccination rate up. So we're a movement that is sort of constantly involved in social causes. So yeah, that's been my involvement.
So now I know, because someone was at the shop when they were being printed, but I know you're getting some signs printed. When do those go up, and what will they be?
Well, that's a good question. So obviously we'll be completely within the rules of the Napier City Council's by-elections. I'm a bit concerned about some of our opponents' signs at the moment and wondering whether they're quite within the letter of the law. But I have a team of people that are organising that, and so I haven't got the specifics, but I know that we'll be putting, a lot of hoardings out on the 14th of July, which is when the 3-month period for hoardings in Napier is official.
Yeah. So you've obviously run campaigns, you know how to run them. What is going to be, because given that you are fairly unknown by the larger voting population, what is going to be your strategy to get voters?
Well, I think I don't take it for granted that, just because we had the last couple of elections were really successful here for Stuart, I don't take it for granted at all that those people will automatically switch over to me. So I'll be getting out there and working really hard to earn people's respect and show them how, I have got, deep experience across a range of sectors that means that I'm somebody who can get stuff done.
Yeah. Because your opponent has had a bit of a free ride up until now, Katie Nimmin. She's been a candidate without an opponent, and also her name's on virtually every bus or most of the buses in Hawke's Bay. How do you counter that?
Well, we're going to have to get moving. We're going to be out there doing street corner meetings. We're going to be visible in the community. We're going to be running all sorts of things, So watch this space. We're
and door knocking?
Absolutely. We'll be door knocking. We'll be having street corner meetings. You'll see us out and about, and I'm looking forward to meeting as many people across the electorate as possible. Yeah.
Now, obviously, you've had a close relationship with Stuart. What do you think about what happened to him, and was he treated fairly by the party?
That's a really good question. I think, look, Stuart has been nobody would disagree, I don't think, with the fact that Stuart has been a really hard-working and committed MP for Napier. He has advocated really strongly for this city and this region. He's also well known as a really capable and effective cabinet minister, and he made a really dumb mistake, and he's paid the price for that, and he's fallen on his sword. And I really wish him well as he moves on to other things, because in many ways I think people sort of underestimate the hours that politicians work that are as hardworking as Stuart, and I wish him and his family well. They'll probably enjoy getting some more time back with him.
Yeah. Now, obviously, campaigns are expensive. Where are your finances coming from?
That's a good question. So the Labour Party is a grassroots party. It'll be lots of little donations. It'll be every time we have a meeting, we have a raffle. We're not going to have the huge access to funds with the huge donors that the National Party does. But what we do have is we have more boots on the ground. We have people that care. We have people that will deliver our pamphlets for free. If any of my friends are watching this, they might find they get tapped up.
Now, Napier has always been a bit of a unique electorate, and more often than not, except for 2020, the party vote goes to National, and then Stuart came along and he won the seat, and obviously they're quite independent in picking their candidate, even though...
And they'll split the party in the candidate vote sometimes.
So, what makes you think that you can convince the quite astute Napier voters that you're the one for the job?
Yep. So, the first thing I'd say is that I think that the policies of a Labour-led government are the best for the people of Napier, and I think you see that in the budget yesterday. I think that we're hearing a lot of hot air and noise about inflation from National, which is a party that would reduce tax rates, which would fuel inflation, and we're doing the things as much as we can to take some pressure off working people. I mean, increasing access to childcare, that's a huge benefit for people that want to get somebody else back into the workforce. If that's been the barrier to getting back to work early, I mean, there's plenty of jobs out there at the moment because we've managed to get through, probably the biggest economic shock since the last World War, and managed to have unemployment only at 3 to 4%. That's been incredible. So I think that I think that Labour has the best policies.
Okay, and what are the other issues that you think will win you the seat? The local issues, anything that you? What are your priorities?
I think that so to finish answering that question, maybe I only partly answered it. that, so first thing, I think people should vote, Hutchinson Labour, right? That's clearly, we're running a two-ticks campaign here. But I think that I'm somebody that, because of my business experience, like I've spent the last 20 years working with really senior leaders, leaning into really difficult challenge in some of New Zealand's biggest companies, right? And so I know how to get stuff done working with people. And I think that I could work really well, if I needed to, across the aisle with people with moderate, sensible economic views that are good for New Zealand, right? There are some big issues that need to be attacked in a bipartisan way. And, I have spent my career surrounded by people, many of whom would probably sit on the other side of the political debate, but I've got things done with them. I think the other thing would be that, if I was a direct appeal here to Green voters in Hawke's Bay, they're never going to get the candidate across the line, but I'm absolutely committed to doing what we can around the issues of climate change, around adaptation to climate change. And James Shaw is absolutely somebody that I could, work closely with. And I'm sure others in the Green Party.
Yeah. So what other issues locally do you think Napierites are concerned about?
Well, I think first and foremost at the moment, it's a pretty tough time. Some people are doing it really tough out there, and that's hard. I've got friends that have, when I rang to say, can I shovel some silt, they said it's no use unless you've got a digger, mate, because there's just so much silt, right? It's so the first thing is that, and as the government has been, $1 billion further announced on the stop banks of the Tūraukuri last week, standing right alongside, because it's a locally led recovery, right? So they're standing right alongside the local councils and local agencies to make sure that people get what they want. And I appreciate that things feel like they're not coming fast enough for some people, but it's been a huge hugely damaging kind of event, and there are some huge and difficult decisions that have to be got right. It's not easy just to come in and wave a magic wand and make 500 million tonnes of silt go away, and the funding's there for that, right? But you can't magic it away. It's a big job. And so I suppose what I'd say is I know from speaking with Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson and Kieran McAnulty and other ministers, that they are absolutely there and committed to funding whatever is required. And they've said it'll be a rolling more, right? Yeah. They'll keep bringing more, and then they'll see what the need is and they'll bring more again. But I can tell you what cutting the top tax rate won't do. It won't fund a better rebuild.
Because some people did feel there were gaps in that announcement. $1 billion, not going to come close, and you say it's a rolling wall and that. But the growers, they actually sit in there and they need money now, and it's vital to get our local economy going again. What do you say about that?
Well, you can be sure I'll be advocating, I'll be getting out there, meeting people, and I'll be advocating as strongly as I can for the businesses and people of Hawke's Bay that have been affected. Obviously I'm new to this, I haven't got all the detail on what's going on, but I'm happy to hear from people on a case-by-case basis and advocate for them.
What do you think you can do for the people of S Valley and that who are really suffering, you as a candidate, and what do you think you can do?
Well, I think that's tricky because, again, short of magicking away, an enormous amount of silt, which is the only thing that's going to, there are parts of the Esk Valley that are so damaged. It's going to be some years before things get anywhere near like to how it was before, and the land use may be changed. So, I think what I can offer is that I'm somebody that's got a track record of working with people and organisations and businesses in the public and the private sector to get stuff done. And I can't tell you what that is all right now, but I can get in there and get leaders to work more effectively. I think that's been my track record.
Having a background as a clinical psychologist, do you think that will help you in your campaign?
Help me in politics. So that's really interesting. I've always been fascinated and interested in what makes people tick. I guess understanding what makes voters tick's important.
So just going back to what people are feeling out there with the cyclone and that, and the communities in Hawke's Bay that are desperate to know the assessments of their houses and whether they can move back or not. There's criticism that the government is taking their time, and could it have gone faster? Can it go faster on this issue?
Well, I think they're working on that, but if you have a look at the examples of things like the Canterbury earthquakes, these are pretty irrevocable decisions once they're made, and you can't get it wrong. So there's complex work being done, about water flows, land management. If the water doesn't flow here, then where will it flow? What can be done with stock banks? These are not things that you can magic up a solution to overnight. But I do know that every effort is being made to get to the decisions around that stuff as quickly as possible, because it's awful. It must be awful living with that uncertainty.
Yeah, because it might be a week or that, or only 2 weeks to the government, but for some people it's living in a trailer on their property, looking at their house full of silt.
It's awful.
So,
it is awful.
Do you think the government is aware how people are suffering?
I think they are, and I've heard ministers say that when officials have come up with certain plans, they've said, no, you need to go and see what's happening, right? So I think that the key ministers have been here multiple times. So from early on, they have been looking very closely at what's happening on the ground and pushing as hard as they can to get change to happen. But, it's big and it's difficult, and these things, you can't magic it away, unfortunately. It's sad and it's hard, but there's not simple solutions for some of these problems. And it's better that with the land decision stuff, they get it right once and for all, than to, tell people that they can't live in their home and go, oh, actually, we kind of got that wrong. You probably could have.
Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm sure you agree with this, that you've been sitting thinking, and I watch Stuart sort of campaign and everything like that, and now suddenly you're it.
Yeah.
Have you got a steep learning curve in sort of just the knowledge you have to know?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, do you mean knowledge in terms of how to be a candidate, or knowledge about policy and? Well,
knowledge about policy, knowledge about what the needs are of the people on the ground.
Yes.
And also how to be a candidate, I suppose. So all of the above.
I think, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen it from the other side. I suppose I've observed from close up for a long time. I'm pretty keen, follower of politics and economics and what's going on. I mean, I work with senior business leaders, right? So we're talking about the economic context all the time of the decisions that they need to make. So, I'd like to think I'm a reasonably quick study, and I'm, drinking from the fire hydrant of, information.
Now, just on other issues, obviously crime is a big issue in this electorate, and something your opponent has made clear is a big thing for her. It's
kind of a pity that National shut 30 small police stations in 2015, isn't it? Because actually, I kind of get annoyed about this issue from several levels. One is I've been a clinical psychologist working with young kids from disadvantaged families, and you don't fix them by threatening a boot camp, right? Because that is just old, failed policy. That side of the argument, they need to read some of the literature on whether that stuff actually works.
Yeah.
So what we get in crime is social policy from 10 to 15 years ago, right? And so the investment that Labor is putting into rehabilitation, supporting families, dealing with child poverty, will have an impact on crime in 15 years from now.
But what about communities now that aren't feeling safe now?
Again, and that's not good. So what we are doing, let's talk about what people do when they're in power, because I don't think you should judge politicians by what they say when they're sitting in this seat. I think you should look at the history of what governments do when they're in power. So if you look at the last national government, they let the numbers of police per capita drop quite significantly. And Labor is pushing hard to get the per capita numbers of police back to where it was when John Key took office. That's an expensive and long road. It's taken till now to get an extra 1,800 police. I think we're just about, the argument is what day will we actually get there? Because of course you're trying to push more police through the training. And Stuart did a lot of this work actually.
Yeah. And
you find that some people leave, right? And the other problem we've had with the public services, of course, is that we don't pay as well for our public service professionals as our take, for example, our nearest neighbour does. And, if you think that cutting the top tax rate will fund us to pay nurses, teachers and doctors enough to keep them in this country, then you're kidding.
Yeah. Now, if you get into Parliament and Labor loses and isn't government, or even if they do win, either way, you're going to be a backbencher. How effective can you be on either side of the aisle as a backbencher?
So I've built my career by not being the person with the levers of power, by being able to influence, bring groups of people together to tackle big problems, to get organisations that, I don't know, have a turnaround situation, or they're merging, or they've got massive growth problem or opportunity, depending if that's a public or private sector thing. And so I'm used to working with people to get things to happen. So I'm not going into politics because I've got an overweening ambition to be in front of this camera or, what number I am in the caucus or whatever. But because I've been a coach, I've been an executive coach. I've been somebody who facilitates groups of leaders to make big decisions. And I think that I'll be able to have a role in the caucus even if I'm the bottom of the caucus ranking.
So do you think, given that your role has been the behind the scenes guy, are you comfortable being in
Well, you tell me.
Well, the first interview
We'll know when we play this back, won't we?
Yeah. So, are you comfortable that? Are you comfortable being in front of cameras on stage?
I often do have to present to groups of leaders, and let me tell you, this is a much easier audience for me than a sceptical CEO who doesn't really know if they believe that culture, that phrase about culture eating strategy for lunch, and then you bring this guy in to say the culture of your business is a problem and it's going to stop you achieving your goals.
Yeah.
So I'm used to getting in front of a sceptical audience, and I think that the business, senior business leaders are not the easiest people to win over, always, especially if you're trying to sell them something.
Yeah. And now, other issues. What's your view on the health system? What's your view on education and that?
Gosh, those are broad questions.
Yeah,
How long have you got?
The short version.
I've worked in the health system.
Yeah.
And do you want to ask a specific question about the health system?
Well, was it the right time for government to make the changes it has during a COVID?
I think Andrew Little was incredibly brave to do that. And I am sick of this argument that it's increasing bureaucracy. The problem with, you remember I was in the NHS in Britain, and the economical size for a health unit has got to be in the million to 2 million, right? And the reason for that is, if you try to do things in the Hawke's Bay District Health Board and in Timaru and Dunedin and everywhere else, there are certain kinds of illness that only come up, occasionally, and so you don't have a specialist for that. Or like my dad, when he was dying, he had to go to Palmerston North, and I get that's still an issue. But creating one health service for a population of only 5 million people with 4 regional units looks to me, based on overseas best practice, about the best model. We had 23 bureaucracies, and when COVID came and we went to pull a lever to do a public health response, there was no lever. Now, you're an investigative journalist. Go back and have a look at which government disassembled the public health system. That was national. Yeah. I think it was Judith Collins, wasn't it?
So, in terms of our local hospital, and there is still, you hear people saying, Napier doesn't have anything. Well, what's your view on that?
Well, I've got a really strong view on that, right? Because I was in this house with helicopters flying over me to get people to hospital in Hastings for the 3 days. I think it was 3 days, wasn't it, before they got the bridges back up?
Yeah.
Now, people may have forgotten, but we used to have a hospital just up the road here, and it was shut by the national government in the 90s. And the argument was that it was okay just to have one base hospital, and they would make sure that there were, A&E services in Napier. Well,
so you're proposing a hospital for Napier?
I'm not proposing necessarily a hospital for Napier, but what I'm saying is look at what people do when they're in power. What National will do when they're in power is they will denude the public service. So I think, I could be an advocate to make sure that we have the kinds of services that we need in a situation like that.
So what does Napier need? You say you heard the helicopters.
You're asking me to step in for the Minister of Health.
Well, I'm asking you for your opinion. You've got an opinion.
Once I'm officially announced in this campaign, I might well have a chat with Aisha Verrill and see what she thinks about that, because I would want to advocate that we had access to 24/7 accident and emergency services, or that at least they could be stood up in an emergency, because it was a shambles.
Yeah.
And it was a shambles because, and the original report done on selling the hospital said, one reason not to shut the hospital in Napier is there's 2 major rivers between Napier and Hastings. Now, it's very expensive. Look how expensive the Dunedin hospital is.
Yeah.
When National gets into government, they make decisions that are very, very expensive to fix later on.
Yeah, and any sort of hospital here or any sort of medical centre would be expensive as well. And we've got a hospital in Hastings that needs refurbishing or even rebuilding.
Yep.
What's your view on the Hastings hospital?
Well, again, I haven't looked at all the numbers and what's happening there. Hopefully, unlike other hospitals that Labor inherited, it doesn't have raw sewage in the walls. Because I think what we were told a myth that we somehow had this kind of amazing economy during the key years. But the reason is it was like a Ponzi scheme. We were inflating GDP by increasing immigration to keep wage rates down. and to not take enough tax to invest back in the public health services and infrastructure that we needed. So I'm sure, and I don't know the detail, but I'm sure that the Hastings Hospital probably needs substantial investment, and it's a very expensive business. I can tell you what it can tell you. The public services will get more attention and better funding under Labour. They won't have a magic wand. Change is difficult. Progress is difficult. They won't fix it overnight. The health reforms won't fix everything overnight. But choosing National at the next election will be a huge step backwards.
Because we need doctors and nurses as well, and some people have criticised the government on the immigration policies.
Yep.
What do you think should be done to make sure we're getting those people in?
So first and foremost, the thing that will, over time, make the biggest difference to nursing has been the pay equity legislation. So nurses have had a huge bump. I think it's something like 35%. Excuse me if I haven't memorised all my figures quite right just yet. But they have had a massive increase, the nurses, in their pay, and other sectors like primary school teachers have as well, just based on the fact that we used to pay women less than men for a similar sort of job. Yeah. And I think that over time, the new fair pay agreements will have a massive positive effect in putting a floor under wages. So the argument that National always presents that you can't let wages rise and it'll cost business too much is rubbish.
Yeah.
Australia has a more productive economy than us partly because they have higher wage rates.
Now, Napier really suffered, and Hawke's Bay as well, with COVID, with tourism and things like that. What do you think should be done to sort of bring it back to the way it was? We've got some cruise ships coming back in. And
that's a good question. Do we want to bring it back to exactly how it was? That's a good question. So I happen to be a strong supporter of Stuart's tourism policy, which is we should be going for more high-value tourism. I think that's exactly right. Don't take me the wrong way. I'm not against cruise ships, and I stop and chat to people that come off the boats, and I love that they come here, and I love that it often makes them want to come back and they get a great experience here. But I wouldn't be pushing hard to get more and more cruise boats. I'd be pushing harder to get the kind of people that come here. I have friends that they've come here because I live here, and then now I find out they're visiting and I didn't even know because they love it here. They stay in a boutique hotel, they go and they have lunch at Black Barn or Mr. D or whatever, and they spend some money. What I hear from retailers and business people is that the people off the cruise boats often come in, they have their Art Deco tour, and everything that they're spending is on the boat, and they don't actually spend much here. Yeah. So I think more higher quality tourism for sure.
So do you think Napier needs to join with the region in selling the region rather than just selling Napier?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think we're a package, aren't we?
So
you stay in Napier and you go to a vineyard in Hastings, maybe.
Where did you stand on the whole amalgamation debate? In terms
that's a really interesting question. That feels like ancient history.
Yeah, but there's some people that saying maybe the crisis, this current cyclone, would have been better served if there was one council.
So amalgamation's one of those words that's loaded. So what I am going to say is there needs to be better cooperation between Napier and Hastings, and you'll see that Anna Lorcan and I, you'll see us out in public cooperating together as a team for Hawke's Bay.
Well, I was just going to ask you that because that's the two national candidates here, Cathy Nimmin and Catherine Wedd, make a lot of noise about how they work as a team and that. And there has
I've known Anna for years.
And some people say that maybe Anna and Stuart didn't work closely together. That's some of the criticism.
It may have looked like that, but I think the reality was he was a minister with many portfolios because he was a good cabinet minister, and he was working huge hours. He was working over 100 hours a week. Yeah. So I think it was harder for him to be possibly as visible at her alongside things. But hey, I won't be a cabinet minister, so all I will have to do is advocate for the people of Napier, and you'll absolutely see Anna and I out in public, as a team. And between her experience as an MP and my experience in business getting stuff done, I think that we make a compelling team.
Because a lot of people say the Jacinda effect caused the red wave that swept all along the east coast and that, and maybe you're not going to have that red wave anymore. How do you think you're going to counter that?
So I'm not sure if it was entirely a Jacinda effect, and I think any Labour government that had been in during that pandemic would have put people first. If it had been Grant or Chippy, or if it had been, we had a string of leaders too, right? I think a Labour Party is predisposed to thinking about how to put people first in those situations. And if you think back to the things that Simon Bridges and others were arguing for, at the time. And what we did, I think what it was people had been scared, and people were glad that somebody had actually saved their grandmother and their aunt. And we've sort of forgotten that now. Yeah. Over 220,000 people have died in the UK, you know?
Yeah.
I have people over there who've lost women in their 30s with young children who don't have a mother or don't have an uncle or a father. Yeah. And, you know, one of the reasons there's a global shortage of health workers is tens of thousands of health workers died of COVID.
Yeah.
We protected our health system from that. And, you know, I know Auckland did it tough, but we had no choice but to get our vaccination rates up. And I think people at the time, people's memories are short, but at the time people saw that the Labour government protected people. That's what I think that was about. So I haven't quite answered the full question. I think Labour will be strong up and down the East Coast. I think, you know, this seat has been a red seat more often in history than it has been a blue seat. And also, you know, as I've said to you, I would appeal to people, you know, yes for 2 ticks, but if they can't bring themselves to vote later, I think I'm a good candidate to get things done.
Okay, if you're not successful in your campaign, what are you going to do?
Job. I'll go. To be honest, financially, it'll be great.
So what's going to happen to your job if you are MP?
That's a good question. So I have really good people. Yeah. And they're keen to keep the business running, and I guess I'll become more of a distant chairperson.
Yeah. So you've sort of answered it, but I'll ask you again in one sentence: why should the people of the Napier electorate vote for you?
So, because, you know, I was born and raised here, I love the place. I've chosen to bring my you know, family here to raise them, and I have the experience and track record in business to know how to get stuff done. You know, I've grown a successful business here from scratch, and I'm passionately committed to making this a better place to live and work, and economically successful.
Mark Hutchinson, thank you for your time today, and all the best in the elections.
Thanks. I look forward to seeing you again during the campaign, Andrew.
Yes, we will.